Hello all. Welcome to Vizuara AI Lab present Machine Learning in Production Lecture 9. This lecture has been divided into part 1, part 2 and part 3. In part 1 we'll see about Flask and how to write code to make this Flask development very clear, and then we'll check about modular ML deployment practices, and then we'll develop the end-to-end project that will have the ML model, then Flask integration, the web framework, and then deployment using Docker, and it would be deployed as well and can be used by any one of you. This project, you can definitely add it to your resume or CV to tell that you know how to develop a ML pipeline from end to end. And that's why this is a very critical lecture series now. And we'll be also seeing that why it is popular. Why we'll be also seeing why Flask is popular. What are modular coding practices? We'll have some new practices as well, because in the last lecture we have already seen how to code effectively. But we still need to cover some more part. Then integrating Flask with ML model, and then hands-on end-to-end resume screening project with ML model, Flask framework, and Docker. As I mentioned before, this project will be very, very crucial for you to learn and understand all the concepts and to apply it in real world. That's why please follow this upcoming 3 lectures very, very seriously. Now, first we'll go with the Flask. But before that, I would just like to tell you in the last lecture, we have discussed about Docker, containerization, how it is different from virtual machine, and what is a Docker architecture. And we also saw the example flow using Iris dataset, and we developed a Docker application. We performed the containerization, we generated the image of it, and we had an understanding about Docker commands and about Docker architecture with practical examples. Now, let us go for the Flask. What is Flask basically? Flask is a Python web framework that provides essential for building web apps, APIs without unnecessary complexity. You might be knowing of Django. That is a Python based framework, but it is quite complex. When you compare Flask with this is very minimal. It's like you get one blueprint kind of thing, a very small template. You perform the minimal task with this. And if you want to add a complexity, you can integrate the extensions into that and make it complex as Django. But if it is not needed, the initial framework is sufficient to have basics functionality in the web. That's why Flask is being popular very much. Now, let us see which companies actually use Flask for their wave framework. So let me type which company uses Flask framework widely. Now you can see the companies like Netflix, Reddit, LinkedIn, Pinterest, they widely use Flask framework in their backend infrastructure for microservices API. And that was our heading for the lecture, that we'll see production ready microservices. That's why I say this lecture series from now onwards becomes more crucial. And if you're following from start, you'll see how your ideology, how the theoretical knowledge that you build throughout this series will help you in practical demonstration. Now, let us go back. What are the core concepts in Flask? First is roots and endpoints. It maps URL to Python function that handle request. Now, take an example of food stall or food restaurant. And if you had some food restaurants around you, and if you want to order this food, what do? You either scan it using app. But rather than taking that example, we'll take, if you call a waiter over the restaurant, you tell him out of the menu which he gives, you tell him, okay, I want this dish, I want this dish, and then that goes to chef. Chef prepare the dish. So waiter acts as a communicator between you and chef. So, chef and you are two endpoints that you want to order, and chef will fulfill that order. And waiter will be the mediator that delivers the food and accepts the order. That's how Request and response handling is also handled in the Flask. They have a get post request. So with the example which we have learned now, you can see ordering from the menu and bringing back the order would come under the process get and post. In terms of our computer science and in terms of the ML, you can say the data would be either into JSON format and the responses might be into the JSON format or CSV format, something like that. But this is how request and response handling is done. We'll be going in depth for this and further. We'll see how to code for request, response, everything, and we'll develop one toy project from this for this lecture, and after the three lectures we'll develop the end on end project. Then it has templates, HTML files rendered dynamically using Ginger 2 syntax. So you can consider the architect. So if you have architect blueprint of your house, these are quite complex, but okay, let me take it. If you have this different options or blueprint ready, you can visualize very easily how you want your house to build on. So you can choose this two, three blueprint or the one which you like. Suppose I like this, then I would like to confirm that, okay, my house should something look like this. And that's how that templates would help me for easy process. Else, if I want to design my house and I don't have any reference, I'll try numerous design. It would might go in trash and there would be a lot of work involved. If I have templates ready, it's very easy for me. And now if I wanted to add one more floor, I don't want this balcony over here, but I want something over this. I can tell those modification, but my template was ready. The blueprint was ready. So that is the power that you have the templates as well. And extensibility, as I said, that this is as a minimal framework, but you can make it as complex as Django as per your requirement, and you can add extensions for this. And that's why the extensibility is one of the key factors. Now, why Flask should be used for ML project? Firstly, it quickly creates an API to serve ML model prediction. Now, if we wanted to sell the dish, suppose for example, I'll take my favorite example of Indian breakfast poha. If you wanted to sell it and you don't know how to sell it, someone suggested that please make a restaurant and build it. So that would be very big task. So you have to first make a restaurant, build it, have table, chair, chef counter, manager. Then you have to bring ingredients. You have to cook poha and then everything. So this infrastructure will take a lot of time. But if you have food truck, what if that food truck has the ingredients and utensils and fuel, like suppose gas or electricity to cook? You just carry that food truck wherever you want and you just serve poha. So your aim of selling poha becomes very feasible when you have the idea of food truck rather than a restaurant. And that's why Flask act as a food truck. It is lightweight, easy to integrate, or in with Docker or cloud development deployment. And it helps separate model logic from user interface. ML model is very tough to understand for the people who are not into that domain. So it might be tough for them to understand a technical language that is completely only for ML's domain people. But they want to use in real world because that's what our aim is. And that's why we should always make a UI or interface from where the outcomes of the ML models are interpreted by user in best possible way. So Flask help us to separate model from logic and from user interface. Now, let us see at the core concepts and keywords that are used while writing Flask application. First is basic application setup. For that, we have to write from Flask. So from Flask library, we are importing Flask class. It is interesting to note here that this is lowercase and this is uppercase. So this is from library. We are importing the Flask class. And then we are initializing the app with this name as an argument inside this Flask class. What does this name suggest? It tells from where you should pick the static files, or where you should search for template folder. This is specified by this name. If nothing is specified for this name, like specific path or something, then it will always by default run at main. If you are aware about or C, so we generally write that int main or something like that. We write when we wanted to run the code, and inside that we write other stuff, functions and all, or the input taking. So it tells the program that where to start. So similarly, this name, if there is not specified other path, then it would consider that it has start from main. Now, let us see one code as well to demonstrate this application setup. But before that, what is written here? I'll just tell you that Flask is a class that creates the application object, and name tells Flask where to look for templates and static files. Now, let us go to VS Code. I have just written the normal file. This is letter file. I have written this basic code, that is basic Flask, whatever we have written there. As you can see from Flask, import Flask class. I have taken the feedback provided by you all in the last lecture that command terminal is not properly visible to us. So I have zoomed in now, and you check that font size is very much visible. And I completely take your feedback very seriously. So please leave us comments and suggestions so that we could improve. Then we'll go to this routing later, but just consider that this says you that go to this certain path as route says and return the hello Flask. Now, since you can see the name is initialized here, that app is equal to Flask name. If name is equal to main, like it starts our program, and app.run debug is true, then it runs the app, and when it runs the app it will run this function as well, and after running it on the local host it should print hello fast. Let us check. So I'll type python 3 basic flask.py. I hope now the commands are visible, and yes, now it is running clearly. Now let me check. Okay. See, you can see there's a hello Flask written. And this is our local host IP address where the code is actually running. Code is actually running, and we could see our interface. And that's the initial setup of Flask. Now let us understand the routing, which we kept pending in the previous code. @app.route path. This is a decorator. There is concept of decorator. If you are not aware, then I recommend you to watch the YouTube series or Vizuara and check the Python classes and learn about decorator. So decorator here, it maps URL to Python function and supports dynamic parameter. Now you could remember that there was hello Flask function in the code. So when you specify this path can be anything, and you could use different commands as well to route that post, get something like that while doing request and response. When you specify exact path, it will go to that function that is defined under it and will return whatever the value that function has to return. So in our this VS Code demonstration, you could see when it shows that just for any address after running the basic code, it goes to the function home and it returns hello Flask. So this is what is routing about. Now let us see the one code that specifies routing much. I'll do one more thing, that I'll clear this terminal so that the commands are more visible to you if you are viewing it on mobile as well. Now you could see this has to be our one concrete step, that no matter what, we have to write this code that import Flask and then initiate it. Now you could say this is hello. If my path is 127.1.0.5000, that 5000 would be the port number. And if I specify slash hello, then at that path, this function would run and it would give me hello Flask as a return on the HTML page. This is dynamic routing. Now I would specify user and username. Suppose I'll put user slash Prathamesh. Then this would greet me with welcome Prathamesh. So this is right, it's variable. So as you specify the exact name in this path, it will welcome you with that name. So if you put here Pranav, so it will definitely return you welcome Pranav. And this should start with main. That's why we have initiated name to the main one, and then it would run the entire code. Now let us check how this dynamic routing works. So you have to type Python 3. I'm using Mac, so I'm typing Python 3 and then the routing.py. But if you're using Windows, you can feel free to use Python as a command as well. Routing.py. Now, okay, it is running clearly. Now let us go here. Now I want you to comment down and tell what should it display. First, we have specified the static route and dynamic route, but this is just normal route. We are not specified where to go from here. So let us check what comes over here. Okay, this is coming not found. The request URL was not found. Now let us enter the exact path. Now I'll type hello. See, you could say it is hello Flask. Because in the static route, we have mentioned that function should return hello. Then if I want a dynamic routing, I'll write user and then Prathamesh. Now this Prathamesh is dynamic parameter over here. I could change that to any other name. Now it will greet me, welcome Prathamesh. Now if I change this to Pranav, it will tell me welcome Pranav. So I'll just give one brief intuition or ideology. When you log into some page, it says welcome whatsoever is the user ID or login ID credential. So consider that as a advanced prototype of this basic functionality that somehow links it to dynamic routing. And that way you can think of how such apps work with the different functionalities. Now, let us see about request and response objects. So these are the request and response object that helps you to access HTTP request data. So it can be JSON files, it can be headers, it can be form data. And in the response, you can represent this response like HTTP responses returned to client. So suppose if you wanted to provide some JSON format data, or you could provide a Python dictionary as well. Suppose if you provide name Prathamesh, when the code will run, so it will go to the path specified methods. So by default, there is a get method. But here we are saying that this function should be only accessible via post method. And then we'll use data is equal to request.json. So this name.pratham or Prathamesh, which has been given in a Python dictionary form, would be converted into JSON format and would be saved. So you can link any database to save it for future purpose as well. And then I return it. So JSON, if I see, it is converting the Python dictionary to JSON. And it will share me the data. Suppose if you give name Prathamesh and then it would somehow tell me that in JSON format, name Prathamesh. You could use post command to request and to get a response. And that's why this is also very important. Now let us see a quick code snippet for this. So as you can say, the Flask would be again required to import. These are all individual snippets. They are not linked together. I just wanted to specify the only one function. I just wanted to specify only one function with respect to the one code snippet. That's why I've divided them into chunks. They are not interrelated. And then you use request and then you use justify. And then here I have had some debug print statement because I wanted to check whether the actual request has been received to the server, or where I have to check whether the request has been received or not. And then I should get the output. So as we saw the snippet there, it's like request.json and then JSONify. So that's how basically if you wanted to convert data and return it as a response in form of JSON file, you could do this function. You can run this function. And these are very simple code, but when you write an entire big code, if you refer documentation, so our main aim is that you understand everything. Since our ideology is built upon that, you should understand everything from scratch and fundamentals should be clear. So that's why we are explaining each and every term. This might sound very simple for some of you, but we believe that we should cover each and every aspect. Now, let us understand few more concepts. Then we'll get back to this again. Then there is session and cookies. Uh, Hope you remember that in e-commerce that we find cookies. So if you previously browsed some other items, when you re-log in again, you find that items are say that recently viewed or your previous history. So that is how session and cookies are about. So session is a secure server-side dictionary stored in signed cookies. So whatever activity I performed when my username is Prathamesh would be stored in that particular session, and that is what the Flask will help you to organize it properly and to save the history of what you were surfing. Next is global object G. So this is the temporary object. This temporary object, and this will be throughout the request object being printed. This will be throughout your request object. What it will do is till the response is being given back for the particular request, it will store the data, like it may store the database connection until you fetch that from a database and the response, it suppose it wants to find out the ID of Prathamesh. So it might store the key that is related to Prathamesh in the from the database, and once it is written, then it would be cleared off. So this is a temporary object. So a rough idea was given to you with respect to Flask syntax. That is, first you have to create an application setup, then you have to do routing, and this is how you define routing. Then you could perform request and response object. Then you can have a session and cookies, and there's a temporary global object G. Now let us go to Ginger to templating engine. Now, what do you mean by templates? So if I wanted to find templates for resume, I'll go for the images one to tell you frequently, like now, these are some templates. What do you mean by templates? Now, I'll take any of the resume that aligns with my profession, aligns with my idea, and I'll just edit it. So, if, suppose the profile, work experience, languages, and education would be different from the person whose template I'm using. But the overall structure, it would be blueprint that I'll follow. I'll change my name, and then I'll change the profile, I'll change the work experience, I'll change the education. But the entire heading and formatting would be similar to as the person to whom I am referring for the resume creation. So that's why the templates are very useful to ease our work, and same is followed with the Flask. Now, if you wanted to print some data, like we had this hello, welcome Pranav and hello Prathamesh, something like that, but you wanted to have that proper GUI, you wanted to make a HTML template that would directly render the object and fit it as per the dynamic parameters. So what you'll do is you'll use Jinja to templating engine. So technical terms, Jinja is fast, expressive, extensible templating engine. Special placeholders in a template allow lighting code similar to Python syntax. And as I said, template is passed data to render the final document. So here are some syntax that we should just remember. This is very similar to the HTML coding because you actually save the file as .html in the template folder. But here is variable that is output. Like if you give username Prathamesh and that is considered as variable. So when you greet it, welcome Prathamesh. So that would be denoted as variable, and parameter value would be fed here. Then the control statements, control structures for loops and condition, if else thing would be carry forward by this control structure, and comments to explain what is happening in the code. If you wanted to transfer code to other team, then having comments would be, enhance the readability of the code. So let us see how actually this works in Flask. So here's one template which we have made, which we have curated, and we'll be using similar to this as well. We'll be using similar to this only. Let us go to VS Code again. Now, I have this app.py, and in that, I'm telling whenever the request comes for the path, the user Prathamesh and items that apple, oranges, banana. So consider this as a list, and I'll return that the render template home.html. So this is the template file. So I'll specify the name of that file. User, the user here is provided already, that is Prathamesh, and atoms are provided atoms. Now I'll go. What you have to do is you have to create the template folder in the same directory of app.py. Then you create the HTML file. Now let us understand the HTML file. So this is basic HTML syntax. We are not going into detail of that. So you initialize that this is a HTML document, you initialize the language, then you tell about head. And since this is title is Jinja to demo, so that's why we have put this as title. Now the body. So when we render this template, what would be displayed on the web page? So welcome would be displayed, and this is user. I hope you remember recently we said that this is a variable. If there has to be some value that is passed, I'll pass it as variable. So this user in our code is defined as Prathamesh, but if you want any other name, you could do that as well, because we are not passing name Prathamesh here, rather we are passing variable user. Then the control statement, if atom. So if there are at least one atom present, then you should list them. Here we have used another list. This is all HTML syntax. I just wanted to tell you that what do we mean by rendering the templates in the Flask. And that's the main aim of this code snippet. And if there are no items available, it will say no items available. And it will end. And this is how the template is created. So if you wanted to enhance this, if you wanted to merge it with the larger part of interface, uh, you could definitely modify this in a very proper manner. Now let us go to run this. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. Now I'll type Python 3 app.py. Now let us check. See, welcome Prathamesh, apple, oranges, and banana. Now let us see if control statements really work correctly or not. Let us go into app.py and let us make it empty list. I'll save this and then I'll try to quit this to run in front of you again. Now let me check what output comes. No items available. Why? The item list provided was empty. Now let us go back to the concept. The request handling life cycle. I'll just give you a brief ideology, as I have said you before as well. You are a customer and you get a menu card. With that menu card, you give some order, and that order is collected by waiter. Waiter then takes that order and gives to chef. Then chef may take recipe book or cook order by himself and return that dish to waiter. Waiter then will serve to the customer as per the order he has given, might be identified by the table number. And this is exactly what happens in Flask Wave framework in the request handling lifecycle. You could see the application, that is mobile app, web dashboard, or cloud service. You give a HTTP request order, and then with routes and view that communicate is communicated by waiter, or in this sense, you could say the route decorator help it to reach to the respective chef or respective server. And then the work happens here about whatsoever the thing. If you wanted to predict the class of the iris flower, it will do the prediction. It will train the ML model and get the prediction. And that prediction would be again given back and would be displayed on your web dashboard, on your mobile app, and on the or with respect to the cloud service. So this is entirely Flask web framework. Now let us understand in technical language. A request, that is client sends HTTP request. Routing, Flask determines the function should handle it. View function runs user defined Python code. Response, Flask return HTML and JSON file. Middleware extensions can intercept at any stage. So we could add this at any stage and they can intercept if you wanted to add some extensions over there. We'll see the previous example of Iris dataset which we run on the Docker. So if you remember, there was a Flask code integrating ML model and Docker services. And at that time, I told you that I'll definitely explain you that Flask snippet in more detail. So that's what we're gonna do after this to understand this entire wave framework in very proper manner. As I said you before, the platform and integrations. Python supports a lot of extension. Flask supports many other platforms to get integrated. It provides one basic template that runs the wave framework. But if you want to add some other libraries, you wanted to add other platforms to it, you can definitely add. So for database, you could add SQLite, MySQL. Then you could always add Docker, which we have seen in the previous lecture as well. You can add Unicorn, you could add Google Cloud Run, and you could add Elastic Beanstalk, you could add TensorFlow, you could add REST API, you could add Angular. So in general, entire web framework, like database, then you wanted to make the front end, back end, everything can be integrated and can be made as a full-fledged production ready project with Flask. But there are some limitation of Flask as well. The strengths are lightweight, flexible, and it has large ecosystem of extension, which we have seen before. But what are the disadvantages? We should know that as well. There is no built-in admin panel unlike Django. You couldn't see that admin panel in Flask where you could see what request has been received, then at that time, what response was there. You can see all the actions in one particular place, unlike in Django. So we'll search for admin panel in Django. So you could see this admin panel. So like this admin panel, we don't have in Flask, and that is one of the biggest disadvantage. And it's not opinionated. So this can't be said as a major disadvantage, but that may lead to, since it's a basic template kind of thing which you can extend as per your project. Uh, since you don't have lot of strict frameworks that needs to add, you might get confused because now in the large ecosystem that could be added, you could have a confusion whether I have to use SQLite or MySQL, whether I have to use TensorFlow, whether I have to use any other library. So this confusion might be created and you might spend a lot of time in this rather than implementing a full-fledged project. So that would be one of the drawback as well. And then scalability depends on architecture design. So as you define architecture, since you have to integrate a lot of other platforms over there, so it's up to you how you design the architecture, build upon the basic architecture. So that is your ability of how to scale it. And if you wanted to make a production ready, that's why you need to think of, if you want to make it production ready, then you must think of architecture that is the most optimal one. Or Virginica. Now, let us see the project which we have covered in the last lecture as well. That is Iris dataset classification. What are the three types? Let us see first. So you have the iris data set that is into three types, that is Setosa, versicolor, and virginica. So we have developed a project last lecture that we have asked user to put input for sepal length, sepal width, petal length, and petal width. And based on that, we have predict either of these three would be given as the flower classification. So now let us understand the Flask code there. Yes. So this was the our code last time. So first I'll have to write Python 3 train.py where I wanted to train the model over the existing data set so that it can help us in predicting. So yes, the model is trained and it is saved. Now I'll run the Python 3 app.py. This is Flask based, so we'll go line by line to understand this. First, you have to import Flask request render template. So see the Jinja 2 template which we have used, that is render template. Then pickle, that is to save the model, and NumPy for performing operations to convert all the inputs which you get into NumPy array so that you could extract the prediction. So you have to initiate the Flask app. Then you have to load the model. We load model with open and the file name, and this is the decorator of root where we first ask to render template index.html. So when you just click on the link, it will go to this page, that is the home page, and it will ask input. And that's why we have this index.html where it will ask sepal length, sepal width, petal length, and petal width. So that is how this template things help. And then after giving input, when we click on prediction, it will go to the path that is predict. And when it go to this path, the method would be given would be post method, and it would run this predict feature. So it would take the features that you provided as input, convert it into NumPy array, and predict on the model that has been trained already, and it will return the rendered template, and the prediction text would be displayed over there. So that's where first features, then final features convert into NumPy array, the prediction, the model dot predict, and it will extract the label that comes with respect to that prediction. Then it will return the rendered template that is index.html, and the prediction text that would be printed as iris class, and it would be 0, 1, 2 on base of Setosa and versicolor and virginica. And this would be running at this local host, and that would be printed where you have to check for the prediction. So this is how this Flask helps to bridge the gap between deployment and ML model. This is a toy example. I have informed you earlier as well that by the end of this part three of the lecture, we'll be developing a very full-fledged production-ready project that will help you to add that to your CV and demonstrate that you have already learned each and every practices in ML pipeline. So please follow us. And now we are at a very important stage. So first I'll clear it. Was it the same local host that is running this? Now let us run this. Python 3 app.py. Now let us check. Yes. Now you could see sepal length. Let's put all 2, 2, and 2. I'll zoom it for you all. And now you could see this is this normal path. So it shows our index page, and it render the index template and just shows normal page where we have to take input. Now when I click on predict, what it will do, now it will go to this path. In this path, it will run this function, and this will perform all the feature perform inside this function and will return us this same page with the prediction text. Now let us run this. Now predict is clicked. And when I click predict, you could see now the path is predict, and now it gives me the same page, but the text printed that is iris class, that is true. That in real world, we are not interested to what is happening at the backend. because that won't be displayed to user. What user want is user want results, the accurate results. And for that, he wanted to give some inputs, and you should be able, he or she should be able to interact with that very easily and should get the accurate results. And whatever happens at backend should not be shown because it would increase the complexity. So this is what real world requires. And that's how Flask will help us to bring our ML models into real world solutions. In the next lecture, we'll see the production ready microservices, and we'll see how to write a modular code for that. And we'll start developing a end-to-end project that will have a ML model, the ML training, then Flask integration, deployment using Docker, and then final deployment or we're using the Vercel app or the using GitHub. But we'll try to do everything that includes your ML model data collection, training, then development, deployment, evaluation. And that project would be very important for you to understand entire stuff. We'll see how the theoretical part which we learned has contributed as well and how it is important. So stay tuned for the next lecture. If you have any comments for us, please let us know. Any suggestion, feel free to DM us. Thank you. See you in the next lecture.